welcome back, everybody. Our next guest is actually, uh, well, we've had her on the show before. Claire is a publishing coach, and she helps authors actually get their book out there. But guess what? She is also a published author, and we get to hear a little bit about her next book in this next interview as she talks about who she is as an author, and it explains a little more about who she is as a person also. So um, this is going to be a really cool opportunity to see who Clair E. Jones is as a person and not just as a publishing coach and a excellent business person. So Claire is a queer fantasy romance author who sold her books in 6 countries and has produced over a dozen journals, planners, workbooks. She is experienced guide that supports other writers in getting their works out there into the world. And as established business, small business and entrepreneur expert of 20 years, she has launched 4 of her own businesses and is now services creatives of all types in achieving goals in less time and with less stress. She's a Seattle-based girl, so which means that from my studio to where she lives is about maybe 2 hours. So welcome, Claire, and may I say congratulations on a new book.
Yes, thank
The-
you. Yes, it is my third, and it's coming out next Thursday, and I've been just a busy little bee over here.
Well, it's especially in the neck of the woods where we live, the great rainforest that it is either you get busy doing something or you just drown yourself in all the, yeah, and that's not cool either. So,
Yeah,
uh,
we are slowly transitioning to the rainy season, and some people love it and some people hate it.
yeah, yeah. Oh, well, in our neck of the woods, it's been a little more dangerous than usual.
Mm,
Yeah. So, but hey, you know, atmospheric rivers happen.
yes, that is true. That is
Yeah.
true.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So first off, let's talk about your new book. What's
Hmm.
on there? You know,
Yeah.
for um gay fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's accurate. It's queer
Yeah.
fantasy romance is what I call it. Yeah, for sure. It is book 3 of an 8-book series that I've been writing for a while now, and so I'm in the middle of writing book 4 at the moment. But it started out as a D&D setting, actually, for a Dungeons and Dragons game. I just kind of wanted to start my own game at a certain point and wanted to like homebrew my own world. And this was in the middle of the pandemic, so I had no one to play with at that point in time. But I later repurposed it for this fantasy romance setting. And so I pretty much crafted a romance story around it and then realized I had a fully fleshed out 8-book series in this world that I could explore because there are 8 classes of magic in the world. And so
Oh,
I decided to write a book from the perspective of one person who wields a certain class of magic. So book 1 is from the perspective of the woman who wields the blessing from the goddess of death. Book 2 is from the perspective of the woman who wields the blessing from the goddess of water. And book 5 is from the hero who wields the blessing of the fire god. And so each book progressively tells the story where they're fighting against evil forces and finding love along the way as well.
Okay, the blessing of from the goddess of death.
Yeah.
That's an interesting twist.
Yeah, so I created a pantheon of 8 gods and goddesses, and they are
Uh-huh.
more or less elementally based. Like there's, water, fire, earth, plants, but there's also life and death as well.
Yeah.
And the magic system in this world stems from a divine blessing that was bestowed upon a bloodline at a certain point in time in the history of this world. And so certain people of this bloodline can wield those magics.
Wow. Okay. Sign
Hmm.
me up. I need a copy of all 8 books.
Yeah. I mean, I love pantheons in general. I have always loved the whole Greek system, the Roman system, but especially Egyptology. I've been a huge fan of ancient Egypt for a very long time. And I actually got a chance to really dive into it in the third book because of the homeland where the third book's hero is from is very much ancient Egypt inspired.
Wow. I, I always got a kick out of people's belief systems.
Hmm.
I, I, I always found it interesting how different natural events brought about a belief system, and it's pretty cool.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, but that sounds like a really good series of books to read. On top of which is like that. I will label myself the uber geek. Also, I used to play Dungeons and Dragons myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I am a huge geek for Dungeons and Dragons, so you are in welcome company.
Yeah, I think somewhere I still have my little sack of dice around somewhere.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, I'm actually blessed with a group right now. We formed it about 2 years ago, and I'm the dungeon master for my group. And we have 3 fairies and a human paladin who are my players.
yeah, I used to have my favorite character was a wood elf.
Mm,
He was also
mm,
a thief with a conscience, though.
yes,
Like,
yes.
no, man, you shouldn't have done that. And I'll have to steal that back from me and give it back to the right people. And it would cause all kinds of trouble in for our group because I would all of a sudden like pocket something that
Mm.
and and then have to give it back, and the whole group would have to come along with me. Some pretty fun stuff. Yeah,
Yeah. You
but
can get up into all kinds of hijinks in D&D. My players are currently reorganizing a pirate headquarters. They've taken over as the bosses of this pirate organization, and they are now doing reorg team building activities with said pirates. And they spent 30 minutes of our last session arguing about how to form a union for said pirates as well, and who exactly gets union member votes in this pirate union.
yeah. Wow, they also starting to sound like like some real life issues too. You know.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about tabletop role playing games, and I think role playing games in general. I mean, art and creativity in general, it's a reflection of the real world. I mean, that's where we go to grapple with heavier topics that might be more stressful to deal with in the real world, but it's the safe world of fantasy that we get to
Yeah,
experiment with them.
and hopefully every now and again something comes out of there that can actually be used in the real world to like help better humanity itself. So
Absolutely. Dungeons and Dragons is being used more increasingly in group therapy sessions as a tool to help people somatically work through their issues.
well, I didn't know that.
Mhm.
And I can see how it can work. Uh, definitely towards the better. Yeah.
Mm.
So So you created this world. I'm assuming it took more than just a few rolls of the dice to come away
Yes. Yes,
with a
it
world that
definitely
can
took
be
a
formed
while.
into a book. So yeah.
Mhm.
Um, what else you inspired? How the magic should work and how the energy of that magic should work and everything.
Yeah, well, I've always, like I said, loved pantheons, and so I love the idea of divinely granted magic. I've always loved that in books that I've read. But when I was younger, I was a huge fantasy reader. I'm still a huge fantasy reader, and particularly when I was younger, I loved books that, and still to this day, focus on different characters. And
Yeah.
so I often get tired if it's the same protagonists all throughout a series. It's like I understand their point of view and I want another person's point of view for the next book because they tend to repeat the same emotional themes over and over again if they're the same protagonist throughout the series. And so I really liked the idea of kind of passing the baton between these different magic users. And so that gave me a chance to play with more character types, honestly. And I've honestly had a really fun time trying to coordinate the magic that they use to their personalities as well. Like, what
Mhm.
are plant characteristics that show up in the person who wields the magic of plants? What are fiery characteristics that show up in the person who wields fire? Like, for example, in my second book, the one who wields the water blessing is very emotional. She has very deep emotional experiences in the way that she interacts with and perceives the world. And throughout the book, I've specifically used water based descriptives to describe her emotional experiences. So I use words like the emotion washes over her or her anxiety drips out of her. And so I'm using descriptive words that match her magic class in subtle ways, but she also has a temperamental aspect to her as well, which water, like the ocean, can be. It's a vast place, the ocean. So, how can I match the characteristics of the magic class to the magic wielder?
Wow. That's a lot of imagination.
Oh, all I do is imagine. I spend my whole day in my imagination, man.
Hey, that and that can be a really cool place to be, So
Yeah, I mean, it gets maladaptive at certain points in time. There's
yeah.
such thing as maladaptive daydreaming, but I try to stay on the adaptive side.
Hmm. How often do you fail? No, don't answer
I'm
that.
getting better at it. I mean, my therapist did graduate me a couple years ago, so I feel like I got her blessing to graduate.
There you go. No, I don't think my therapist is ever going to let me go. It's like he says I get too, or should I say they say I get too deeply involved in the issue at hand.
Mm.
Hey, it's human rights, right?
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, we all have our nerd zones, I like to call them.
yeah, yeah. Speaking of one of your nerd zones, we're going to dive away from the book for a second to talk about because you're like the one of the most serial of entrepreneurs I've ever met with
Yes.
how many different businesses, right?
Yeah, publishing is my fourth that I've founded.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
all have seen some level of success and everything. So
Yeah, I mean, they've all provided me with great learning opportunities and great lessons, and that in itself I find is a success to me, and they've all made money in some shape or form, which is also a success to me. So I started out, my first business was a general store devoted to local goods. It was a brick and mortar location in West Seattle. And that really was birthed from my love of locavorism at the time, which is the concept of trying to consume as much of your daily consumption needs locally as possible. Typically, it's relegated towards food consumption, like how can you eat local produce,
Yeah.
meat, etc., as locally as possible. But I extended it to basic goods as well. And so I sourced my store with 95% goods that were produced in the Pacific
Yeah.
Northwest, and 5% was US in general. So, like, I imported coffee from Hawaii, for example. And so that was more of like a extended locavorism.
Well, coffee's a tough one for the area that we live in because
Yeah.
coffee will not grow here.
Yeah, exactly. So there were some
We're
limitations.
basically in the same rainforest. They won't grow here.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's a
And
tough one. But from what I understand though, uh over 50% of your goods in that store when you had that uh didn't have any more than a 2 hour truck ride.
yes, 95% were Pacific Northwest.
Yeah. So yeah. Which
Hmm.
that's an amazing thing to actually be able to do. And
Yeah, and what I found, what the two consumer pains that I was trying to solve for was, like, one, the amount of time and effort that it took to research where products were made, and two, the amount of time and effort it took to track all of those items down, because typically you have to go to several different shops to get everything on your list if you are looking to buy as much of your stuff locally as possible. And so that's why I made it a general store format. So I had, notebooks to ornaments to jewelry to t-shirts to soups to coffee to pretty much as I could find in a variety of goods so that you could buy it all under one roof and trust that it was locally sourced without having to do the research yourself.
yeah. So just kind of an off the wall question.
Yeah.
How do you rate your relationship building skills to be able to do something like that?
Well, that was honestly my crash course, that first business, because I had worked in retail since a teenager. And so I knew how to run a retail store logistically, but I didn't necessarily know how to promote a retail store. I'd never really been in that kind of position, as to be in charge of the marketing efforts of a retail store. And so when I looked around for mentors in the space, I went to places like SCORE, through the SBA, which is the Small Business Association that the government provides. But I also found organizations like the Small Business Development Council, SBDC, and I found a free mentor through them that I was instantly a fan of. And he introduced this concept of networking to me. And I was like, what is this word that you speak of? I have never heard it before. And so that store was a crash course in me learning how to network and how to develop business relationships in a fruitful way. And I made a lot of mistakes, to be fair, when I was starting out. But yeah, that was officially 10 years ago at this point. And I would have to say my score nowadays is miles beyond where it was back then.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole point of entrepreneurship. It isn't the 9 to 5 grind. It is a daily learning experience, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I was working 60 hours a week in that store because I had to man the store myself. I had to physically be there in order for the store to be open day in and day out. And so it quickly overtook my life.
Yeah. Well, that's the other secret of entrepreneurship. We we all work what is it? Half days we pick which 12 hours
Yeah.
they were
Yeah.
going to
Or
work.
like, how about like we sleep like a quarter of the day and 3/4 of the day is left over for
Exactly.
yeah, 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 yeah. So
But,
from there, I actually went into business consulting because it was such a huge crash course for me.
um, yeah,
I suddenly realized that after 2 years of doing that, 2 years of learning the ropes, 2 years of learning as much as I could, it was basically my crash course MBA. And I could then go to other small businesses in the area and be like, hey, this is what I learned. This is the research that is behind what I learned. And we can also improve your operations and marketing and systems and stuff like that to benefit them.
yeah. You had that special kind of MBA though. It wasn't a university MBA. It
Yes.
was a street MBA.
Exactly. I joke that I got my MBA via Google. Like I honestly think it's more worthwhile these days than a paper MBA from a university because it's hands-on, on the job learning, and you learn so much more from that than you can from a detached spreadsheet lecture.
Yeah. Don't say and don't misunderstand everybody listening that we're not saying you shouldn't do that sort of work. It's an important work also, but hey, look for the real world stuff also
Yeah,
because it's going to one is help you build relationships because you have to join in with people in order to make that work. So
absolutely. I mean, that's one of the ways that I really truly learned the meaning of the phrase, it takes a village.
yeah, yeah, it does. It does take a village. Yeah. So that led us to which next business?
So I started working more in other small businesses, kind of as an employee, but more of like a consultant employee for a few years. And from there, I was actually working with a leadership team of a small business who were kind of failing at being leaders in their business. Like this is very common in the world of small businesses is that they are an expert in the skill that they build the business around, whether they're a contractor or for my example they were dog walkers and trainers, but they weren't necessarily skilled in leading the businesses that they built around those skill sets. And so as a result, I was doing a lot of research into leadership skill development for them to try to help train them into being better leaders in the companies that they were leading. And that's when I found the Neuro Leadership Institute. I stumbled across their research one day when I was doing leadership skill development research, and they are an institute over in New York that combines the science of neuroscience and the soft skills of leadership skill development. And so they pretty much use the scientific method. They use fMRIs, they use psychological studies, they use as much hard science as possible to study what goes into making a good leader. And they have founded about 4 facets of neuro leadership. I believe one is making decisions, two is collaborating with others, three is facilitating change, and the fourth, I think, is self regulation, I want to say, if I'm remembering correctly. And so finally, I found research that gave me hard science behind those soft skills because often when you come to leadership skill development, it's anecdotal and observational, and more often than not, based on a very privileged perspective.
Hmm. Yeah. Either that or is it from the armed forces.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was hooked. Once you gave me that hard science behind soft skills, like I was absolutely hooked. So I ended up becoming a neuro leadership coach. as a result, and studied under the institute, got a certification, and opened up, set out my shingle as a neuroleadership coach. And so that's when I then started doing coaching programs with leaders in businesses who wanted to improve the way that they led their companies. And so that was my second business.
Oh, well, you eventually wind up doing because you currently coach creatives in how to get their work out there.
Yeah, that's a different iteration of it. The neuro leadership coaching morphed a couple times in terms of my focus. I morphed into business consulting for a time in that business, and I also morphed into wellness coaching for executives as well during that business, and
Mhm.
kind of a transition coach of sorts because I was finding the root causes to a lot of these leaders' problems didn't necessarily have to do with their business know how or their leadership know how, but their self management was often what it boiled down to in terms of time management, wellness management, and mindset management. That was more often the case in terms of where they were falling short in how they could improve the way that they were running their organizations. And so that business morphed a few times. And so I have taken the vestiges of those coaching practices, consulting practices, and kind of integrated them into my publishing company now, where I work with authors and other types of creatives in their business management.
Yeah. Hmm.
And then for a short, hot minute, I had a sweatpants company.
Right.
Yes, sweatpants. That was during the pandemic.
But I can see that being your brand of fashion.
Yeah,
You
I
always look so comfortable. You always don't understand this for everybody who's watching is like, um, the plaid shirt, the scarf, and everything. But you always look. It may be eclectic, but it's put together.
thank you. Thank you.
And
It has taken me years to get to this point. Thank you. Yes, my fashion sense did evolve rapidly during the pandemic, as I think everyone's did. Prior to the pandemic, I thought it was a cardinal sin to wear sweatpants in public.
I generally don't. Although, okay, I do spend a lot of my time in especially since we're getting into the colder weather with our planet going into the shadow of the sun.
Mm,
Um, the fleecy warm leggings, my
mm,
so
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And so in the pandemic, sweatpants were becoming more and more of an acceptable public wear item. And I thought, why couldn't we have fun sweatpants out there? Sweatpants in bright colors and bold patterns. And that kind of sweatpant hadn't really hit the level that it is to this day because the whole athleisure industry was transformed by the pandemic and people going for more comfortable wear out there in the world. And so I started a sweatpants company that was based on, more fashionable sweatpants, but were also high quality make and made in the US as well.
Uh,
So that was kind of my attempt at reviving the whole locavorism thing that I had going with the general store while also trying to tap into my creativity, which hadn't really been well fulfilled with the consulting and the coaching. I
yeah.
kept finding myself, I'm a creative at heart. Every bone in my body is a creative bone. And I just have this generative creative need that I need to address day in and day out. And so the sweatpants company was my first attempt at finding a business model to encapsulate that.
Hmm. But it sounds like fun.
It was. I mean, I had a ton of fun designing the sweatpants, but the thing about fashion brands, especially with custom fashion brands and not white label fashion brands, is that they are very expensive to start.
Yeah, because you still do need to find someone to actually physically make the sweatpants,
Yes, and in order
and in
to
small
get
quantities to be consumed
yes,
by the public.
exactly. And so for my first run of inventory, just to launch the company itself, I had to invest $250,000 into sweatpants.
Yeah, let's not go down the $250,000 road too often though, because um, the person sitting on this side of the Zoom call uh, put $250,000 into a TV show, only to be told it was never going to be made.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
imagine because you have a significant other, right?
No, actually, I am single with my dog.
Oh, what's your dog? Well, I actually had to go a after hearing that the TV show was not going to be made or aired or any of that sort of stuff. I had to go home and tell my wife that I had spent $250,000 from out of our savings account to a project that wasn't ever going to happen, and there was no recouping the money.
Yeah,
And
that
that's one of
was,
the downfalls of entrepreneurship. But hey,
yes, that was the era of my life where I learned the phrase, it's not a life lesson unless it costs at least $10,000.
it's a good saying.
And that honestly changed my relationship to what a whole lot of money meant.
Mm,
And I think that that was a great mindset shift for myself as an entrepreneur as well, to truly understand, like, $500 here and there sure might make a difference in my bottom line, but at the end of the day it's not a true life lesson unless it's over $10,000.
yeah. So, I was going to say there was a question right on the tip of my tongue about that. Um, how important is it as an entrepreneur to expand our idea of what a large sum of money is?
I think it's very important, and I think it's a piece that a lot of starting entrepreneurs and starting small business owners forget, because I think we waste a lot of worry energy on small sums. Like, don't get me wrong, it is definitely a good idea to budget and to track your expenses and to understand where each dollar is going in your business and where it's being used and how it's being used. That is definitely fundamental to running a business. But I think you have to have a more expansive approach to those smaller bills and those smaller expenses, because I run into so many people who waste so many hours a day sweating the small stuff. And at the end of the day, like, to use the MBA example, for example, like an MBA costs $30,000 to $50,000, right? Out of a university. That's usually what you expect to pay for 30 for an MBA.
Really? Oh, I thought it was. Thought that the price tag was a bit higher, but hey,
It
let's go with it. Let's go with it.
Yeah, I mean, it honestly depends on the university you go to, for sure, and whether you're in state or out of state, and whether you have financial aid, and so on
Yeah,
and so
yeah,
forth.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Um,
okay.
but what is the difference between spending 30,000 on an MBA or spending 30,000 on a business? What is the difference between spending $30,000 on a new bathroom and spending $30,000 on a business? At the end of the day, you can choose which expenses are going to propel your goals further, and which expenses are going to give you the most ROI, return on your investment,
Mhm.
versus, like we spend what, 40 grand on a car sometimes, 50 grand on a car sometimes, when it's often a status symbol, right? And
Yeah,
so you can look at spending $30,000 on a business as an investment in yourself rather than an investment on a status symbol. Or if you just really need a good, big, better bathroom, like if your bathroom's falling apart, there's nothing wrong with spending the 30, 40, $50,000 it takes to remodel your bathroom. But it puts those types of expenses into better perspective so that you understand what you're choosing to spend your money on, because the money is going to be spent either way.
right. But and that's the money should be spent because one of the I think one of for our public in the U.S. and Canada, that one of the most expensive things that people have is a savings account. It
Mm,
costs them more money than they think.
yeah, yeah,
So we have to be careful about that.
yeah, exactly.
And it's I'm sure you're gonna agree with this one also that it's it's okay to sock money away for the rainy day.
Sure.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
Um, but it's a when you make yourself suffer the rainy day just
yeah,
to have the rainy day money, you might want to rethink that, right? So
yeah. I mean, it's a fine balance to make, and each person is going to have to make that decision for themselves, is what kind of balance of risk and safety you're willing to accept in this endeavor of this entrepreneurship cycle, or even just how much you spend on expenses versus what you save in the bank or wherever you save it. And I think a lot of people are reluctant to spend money on unusual things like business ownership, and are more willing to spend money on usual things like cars, bathrooms, so on and so forth.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. Um, we have a sitting in our driveway because I keep the business truck here. It costs, it costs us something like $150,000 for a truck.
Yeah.
You know, well, but that truck can haul a whole TV set, like a talk show TV set worth of
Mm.
stuff in it to get from point A to point B, so that we can actually provide entertainment for an audience, and with that entertainment, we get money, lots of money from sponsors, right? Hopefully.
You have to make really conscious decisions on the strategic use of money at the end of the day.
Well, let me ask you this, because we're talking a lot of language that only entrepreneurial creatives are going to
Mm,
catch on to.
mm,
Um, so to create our art, rather it be the book, the painting, uh, the documentary, whatever it is, uh, it costs. There's a cost to it,
mm.
and um, balancing the cost versus the return, and how to spread the cost throughout the community so that you can actually live.
Mm.
How do you help people figure all that out?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is looking at their resources. Like when I said that before, is like the strategic use of money. I think it's more the strategic use of resources. And that involves money, that involves energy, that involves time, that involves community. Is who do you have access to? What are they willing to provide? What time do you have access to? What time are you willing to commit? What energy do you have access to? And what energy are you willing to commit to it? And what money do you have access to? And what money are you willing to commit? Because the more intentional and strategic we get about those decisions, the more we're able to plan accordingly. Like, you start to accept the consequences of the decisions you make, which it sounds so simple, but it's actually a really radical concept to a lot of people these days, is that they don't equate consequences and decisions often. Is like decisions to purchase cable versus a decision to invest in a financial course or something like that. They think that cable is the automatic answer oftentimes, but financial courses may have a greater reward in the long term. So, in terms of community, you can also intentionally and strategically tap into your community in the same way. Is who is also resourced enough and willing enough to help you in this endeavor, and how can you, I don't honestly want to say use your community because that sounds predatory, but tap into the well of resources that are available when you bring multiple people together. And I think a very specific example of this, to make it a little more concrete, is crowdfunding. I think crowdfunding is becoming more and more of an option for people nowadays, whether it's funding a creative endeavor like art, music, books, TV, so on and so forth, or whether it's just funding lifestyle expenses. I recently donated to a friend who did a crowdfunding campaign for medical expenses for her dog. And I think it's an attempt to go back to more village centric ways of living that we've had in the past, where people pitch in when a member of the village is in need because they believe that they would also pitch in if they were in need.
Well, okay, toss out a large university kind of word. Uh, we are a gregarious species.
Mm,
So,
yes. Do you mean Gregorian as in the calendar, or do you mean gregarious as in loquacious?
as in, we got to be part of a society, right?
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah. Which also means that not only do we have to talk to each other, we have to hang out with each other, but it also means that we have to lift each other up.
Yes. Yes. I think we've gotten too isolated in this world of technology that we live in. And I think we can see that in the mass difference between how families stick together in different countries versus in the US and Canada. We have gotten very isolated in our family structures.
Yeah. I have a really good example of that, but I'm not going to share it with you at this particular time.
We are definitely officially on a tangent.
Yeah, that's going to lead a huge political tangent, and this is not a political show. So, hey, with time we have left, character list for your books, because I want to get back to the book, because hey, we want to promote the heck out of your book, because hey, we want you to sell 1 billion copies.
Yes, that would be nice for sure. Yeah, I mean, in the first book, we have Keela, who is the moon blessed, the goddess of death blessed. We have Nasima in the second book, who is the water blessed, and then we have Rockmint in the third book, who is the fire blessed.
Now, you going back to the because I've kind of feel drawn to this water character,
Oh yeah.
which is kind of funny because if we were to look at my numerology and my zodiac and all that kind of stuff, I'm air, 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 just floating
Huh.
away air. But there's something that you said um, about her that leads me to or did you actually paint her like as an empath or something like that? Because
Yeah. I mean, she feels everything very deeply, and I think she picks up on other people's emotions more so than other characters in the book, for sure. Um, like, Rockmit, because he is the fire blessed, I had a lot of like fiery impulsiveness built into his character as well. And he's a bit blind sometimes when it comes to people's emotional experiences.
yeah. Hmm. So, so it also makes how do you see um, each element developing inside of a person?
In terms of the magic mechanics, or for like me developing a character?
Um, well, it's going to be a little bit of both, I think,
Okay.
um, because how you view a fiery personality is going to be how you're going to rate the fiery personality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah, so
yeah,
how
for
do you
sure.
see those elements develop in people?
Yeah, I mean, I chose the elements first. I chose the magic abilities first, and I also chose their genders first. I knew going into it, like whether I wanted a hero or a heroine or even non-binary is going to show up as well later on in the
Hmm.
novel. Um, and from there, I sort of crafted the characters around like not only the elemental influences but also certain personality traits that I wanted to play with. Sometimes they're inspired by other characters that I've seen out there in the world. Sometimes they're inspired by songs that I've come across. But I usually have a element. I have a gender, I have a sexuality usually that I begin with for the character, and then I have different tropes, different relationship dynamics, different character traits that I think align with those first three choices that I then assign to those various characters.
Very cool.
Yeah. So I have like a whole playlist of songs that are all character songs for me that put me in the mood and the perspective of the various characters. And that's what really truly drives home my connection and understanding of the characters themselves.
So you create a whole environment around yourself in order to write the character.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Like, because I'm feeling from their perspective. Like, when I was writing the water character, I was in the feels all the time because she was in the feels all the time. And she was just so emotional that I had to tap into that aspect of myself to be emotional as well. And so, for example, for book four's character that I'm writing right now, she is very angry with where she is in life at the moment. And so I've kind of had to rile myself up in order to write from her perspective, in order to tap into the anger that's inside of her.
Hmm.
And so songs definitely help with that.
Yeah, hit that part. Kind of as a quasi actor, you got to find that, and you can't keep replaying that same emotion because then it gets tired and hackneyed and oh,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have to play the playlist a few times in order to sink into the character's point of view, but once I'm there, that's where the flow starts for sure.
Sounds like a lot of fun too.
It is. I mean, I get so much dopamine from writing. I'm not one of those writers that can do short chunks every day. I honestly hate the advice to write every day. I think it's unsustainable and sets you up for failure, but that's a whole nother rant. I like to have long blocks of writing time. And so I schedule at least 3 to 5 hours per writing block because that allows me to fully sink into the flow and fully sink into the character without having to divert or distract my attention to other things going on.
Cool. Sounds like a lot of fun, and I do actually look forward to getting a hold of the book. But hey, I need that special link that guides me to where the book is.
Linktree/Clair Jones.
That'll be in the show notes, guys. So I want you to when it would be October what?
October 31st. It's Halloween every year.
It's Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
Halloween. Yeah. Okay. I was gonna say it sounded like Halloween. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this before Halloween in 2024, you know, um, give it another couple of days. It'll be up there. If you're listening after Halloween, go get the book. It's going to be
Mm-hmm.
fun. It's going to be enjoyable. And if you like fantasy, fantasy romance in general, you're going to really love what Claire's writing. So go check it out. It is again. The link is Linktree. What?
/Clairjoyance.
There you go. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thank you, Claire, for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here.